In the modern age of World War II, where technological war machines destroyed the world, can you believe that a British officer could stop an entire German unit with just a bow and sword? In history's bloodiest war, are you curious to know why this man, who charged into enemy lines playing bagpipes with a sword in hand, was called Mad Jack, and how he survived? Would you like to witness how a soldier who rejected all rules of modern warfare turned the course of war into legend by shooting a German sergeant with a medieval arrow? In May 1940, the world was burning with the flames of World War II. The steel boots of the Wehrmacht were crushing all of Europe. Poland had fallen, France was on the verge of collapse. While the British Expeditionary Force was trying to find its way to the sea, hundreds of thousands of soldiers waited desperately on the beaches of Dunkirk. On the other side, one soldier was envisioning a completely different war plan in the twilight of morning. Jack Churchill was 33 years old and had a 600-year-old weapon in his hand. Crouching behind a ruined wall near the village of Lepinet, he was watching 5 German soldiers through the morning mist while battlefields from centuries past crossed his mind. He thought of old Azincourt, Crécy, where English archers cut down French knights. The modern age said courage was dead. In the age of tanks and aircraft, personal heroism had no meaning. War was now the work of machines, factories, production lines. Churchill didn't believe this. He still believed the fate of war could be influenced individually. When he drew back the string of the bow he held, he heard a familiar sound. The sound he heard was the groan of wood, the whisper of power. His fingers found their customary position on the string. He held his breath, his heartbeat slowed. The world shrank before his eyes. As in the championship in Oslo, there was nothing before him but the arrow, the target, and the distance. But this time, the target wasn't a lifeless circle. The arrow suddenly split the air. The German sergeant made no sound as he fell to the ground. He just collapsed, as if he had suddenly become very tired and decided to sleep. His companions didn't even understand at first. They hadn't heard gunfire. There was no explosion. Their comrade was just on the ground, and no one knew why. This German sergeant was the first person killed by longbow in a European war since the 17th century. He would also be the last. And for Churchill, this was just the beginning. To understand Churchill, let's go back. Let's witness his world more closely. When he left the army in 1936, his friends thought it was a wise idea. Soldiering in peacetime killed the human spirit. Mechanical drills, endless paperwork, promotion letters that never came. Such things darkened Churchill's spirit, for Churchill was born to live, not to survive. After leaving the military, he went to Kenya. He worked as a newspaper editor. He acted in films. He crossed India on a motorcycle. He wanted to learn to play bagpipes, and he succeeded. He mastered sword fighting, which was in his ancestors' blood, and had become an irresistible desire for Churchill. The modern world was beginning to feel too narrow for him. A completely different age lived in his soul. 10 years had passed since he graduated from Sandhurst Military Academy. But he was still searching for something. He didn't know exactly what he was looking for. Was he searching for meaning? Was he searching for the formula to challenge life? Perhaps he just wanted to feel that life was lived with purpose. While working as a newspaper editor in Nairobi's dusty streets, while riding a motorcycle in Burma's mountains, he couldn't find that feeling. But in 1939, when the telegram came, he learned the name of what he was looking for. War. The message was quite brief and clear. Your regiment awaits you. Churchill's response was also brief. "I'm coming and I'm bringing some things." The things he brought were bagpipes, a Scottish sword, and a 6-foot English longbow. The unit commander asked in astonishment, "What will you do with these weapons?" Churchill replied with a smile, "I will fight." No rifle? Of course there is. But the enemy expects an attack with a rifle. He doesn't expect an assault with a sword. This reasoning of Churchill's might sound crazy. He had read the military history books. He knew modern rifles were more accurate. But he knew something else. War wasn't just metal and gunpowder. It was creating fear, surprising, freezing the enemy's mind. A man running at you from your trench with a sword, playing bagpipes, was much more terrifying than a man firing from behind the trench. And a man who could silently kill you with an arrow had an advantage that no modern technological weapon could match. Other officers accused him of madness. Some laughed openly. One said, "Churchill's crazy," and added, "He'll die in the first clash." When he returned from Dunkirk, the bow, sword, and bagpipes were still with him. He had undertaken the protective duty for his company to safely retreat. He had killed enemy soldiers with weapons that belonged in a museum, and Churchill was just beginning. June 1940 was a difficult month for Great Britain. The army had lost most of its equipment at Dunkirk. The invasion of the British Isles seemed a close possibility. Prime Minister Winston Churchill wanted a force that could attack the enemy again, prove that Britain was still fighting. The plan was simple but ruthless. Small but highly trained military teams would raid the occupied European coasts. They would destroy enemy facilities, kill Germans, gather intelligence, and disappear before reinforcements arrived. Jack Churchill immediately volunteered for this plan. When training began in the mountains of Scotland, Churchill was older than most volunteers. He was 34. But he was stronger and more determined than all of them. He could walk 30 kilometers a day in full gear, make amphibious landings in freezing water, learn to kill silently with knife and bare hands. The wonder of it was having skills that no one else had. He could hit a target at 200 yards. He played bagpipes going into battle. He could use a sword with the mastery of a medieval knight. The other commandos didn't know what to think at first. Some thought he was just showing off. Others thought he had truly gone mad. But as training progressed, they began to understand Churchill's logic. Churchill didn't carry old weapons because they were superior to modern firearms. He carried them to establish psychological superiority over enemy soldiers in battle, to instill clear fear in the enemy. It wasn't just about killing. A German soldier confronted with a rifle knew how to respond. He was trained against rifles. He could understand the threat, but he had no training against a soldier running at him screaming with a sword in hand and bagpipes around his neck. His mind would freeze, even for a few seconds, trying to process and make sense of what he saw. In war, a few seconds of hesitation meant death. By autumn 1941, Churchill had been promoted to second in command of No. 3 Commando. The unit had made several small raids along the Norwegian coast, but had achieved no significant gain. Then in November, the order came. No. 3 Commando would lead a major attack on the German garrison at Vagsøy, a small island off the Norwegian coast. The target was strategically important. Vagsøy Island controlled access to a fjord network used by German ships to transport iron ore from Sweden. The island had approximately 150 German soldiers, 4 coastal guns, and an air defense battery. The plan envisioned attacking at dawn on December 27, 1941. Jack Churchill obsessively studied the intelligence reports. The German garrison was well trained and well equipped. They had machine guns, mortars, and prepared defensive positions. He requested permission to lead the assault on Malloy Island, which would be the first wave of the attack. Permission was granted. He also requested permission to carry his sword and play his bagpipes during the assault. Although several senior officers questioned Churchill's sanity, that permission was also granted. The night before the raid, Churchill checked his equipment one last time. His broadsword was sharpened, his bagpipes were tuned. As backup, there were hand grenades, a pistol, and a Thompson submachine gun. But he planned to lead the assault not with bullets, but with the sound of the sword and music. The commandos boarded transport ships on Christmas Day. They sailed past the Scottish coast toward the Norwegian Sea. The temperature had dropped below zero. Ice had begun forming on the deck railings. Churchill spent the journey studying maps and rehearsing passwords that would maintain communication with his men. He had 105 commandos under his direct command. Their mission was to neutralize the German coastal battery on Malloy Island within 10 minutes of landing. If they failed, the entire operation would collapse. German artillery would annihilate the landing craft. Hundreds of British soldiers would die in the freezing water. On the morning of December 27th at 8:45, the transport ships had reached their targeted positions 12 miles from the Norwegian coast. Landing craft were lowered into the dark water. Commandos climbed down the cargo nets with full combat gear. Churchill took his position at the bow of the lead boat, bagpipes in hand, sword at his belt. In 90 minutes, he would be either dead or a legend. On the frozen coast of Norway, in the winter of 1941, the struggle between death and life began. Malloy Island, small but strategically important and under German control, would be the first major test for the British commandos. Jack Churchill was second in command of this battle and would manage the first wave assault. As the ship swayed forward in dark waters, the soldiers were silent. Some were praying, some looking at photographs. Others were just clinging to their rifles, hands trembling. Churchill first checked his bagpipes. He didn't neglect to test the sharpness of his sword. Then he went on deck and looked at the stars. The northern stars were different, cold, distant, indifferent. A young sergeant came to his side. "Commander," he said, his voice cracking. "I'm afraid." Churchill turned. His eyes were moist. "I'm afraid too, son. But you're Churchill. That's why I'm afraid. I have much to lose." He smiled. "But there's a way to carry fear. Dance with it, make music for it, show it that you're here too and moving forward despite everything." The sergeant nodded, not fully understanding, but the calm in Churchill's voice had given him something. Perhaps it was hope, or just the comfort of knowing he was beside a leader. As dawn broke, the landing craft approached Malloy through a smokescreen. HMS Kenya Cruiser was raining salvos toward the coastal battery. Explosions lit up the Norwegian coast like lightning. Churchill stood at the front of the landing craft, knowing he would be fully exposed to enemy fire. The other commandos had crouched behind steel railings, but their commander stood upright. His bagpipes were inflated and waiting ready. The coast was 200 yards away. At 8:48, the ramp of Churchill's landing craft fell onto Malloy Island's rocky beach. Before any of his men moved, Churchill stepped into the freezing water and began playing the March of the Cameron Men. The sound of bagpipes spreading around cut through the sounds of explosions and gunfire like a knife. The most Scottish sound in the world was coming from a beach in Nazi-occupied Norway. The Germans at the coastal battery heard the bagpipe sound and couldn't believe their ears. They were trained to fight British soldiers with rifles and grenades. They weren't trained to fight a soldier who walked calmly toward their guns while simultaneously playing music. Churchill finished the piece, laid his bagpipes on the ground, pulled a hand grenade from his belt, and hurled it at the nearest German position. Then he drew his broadsword and charged toward the beach, shouting at his men to follow him. The commandos surged behind him, firing Thompson submachine guns and Enfield rifles. The Germans tried to respond, but were disorganized, confused, still trying to understand what was happening. The assault on Malloy Island lasted less than 10 minutes. Churchill systematically directed his men toward German positions, clearing shelters and gun positions one by one. 4 coastal guns were destroyed with explosives. The air defense battery was captured. The German commander and 15 of his men were taken prisoner. Those who resisted were killed. Those who surrendered had their hands tied and were taken to the beach for evacuation. Throughout the assault, Churchill was everywhere, at the front of every attack, appearing with sword in hand, shouting and directing his men with signals. A German soldier had tried to grab a weapon from a commando's hand during combat, and was killed with a single shot. Another German soldier, severely wounded and screaming in pain, had his suffering ended with a British bullet. Close-range warfare was ruthless and fast. By 9 o'clock, Malloy Island was under control. Churchill received a radio message from the main assault force attacking the town of South Vagsoy. They were encountering heavy resistance. German reinforcements had continued to advance throughout the night, and this advance was larger than garrison intelligence had predicted. Street fighting had broken out in the town centre. Casualties were mounting. Churchill gathered his remaining men and commandeered a landing craft to cross to South Vagsoy. When he arrived at South Vagsoy, the sounds of fighting were rising from everywhere. German snipers were firing from windows and rooftops. Machine gun barrels were pointed at main streets, immediately responding with fire at the slightest movement. British commandos were trapped inside buildings, unable to advance. Churchill and his commandos found themselves in the midst of such a combat zone. Churchill personally led a flanking assault into the street next to the building they were in, drew his sword from his belt, moved through positions. The Germans retreated under heavy fire pressure, unable to defend their positions against attacks from multiple directions. The South Vagsoy battle continued until late afternoon. The commandos systematically cleared the town building by building, room by room. They destroyed fish oil factories by placing dynamite charges. They captured German documents and code books. They took prisoner more than 100 German soldiers. But victory inevitably had a price. 17 British commandos had lost their lives in the battle. 53 commandos were wounded. Churchill escaped from the battle without a scratch. Blood was dripping from everywhere, including the hilt of his sword. His bagpipes hung undamaged around his neck. The Vagsoy raid was the first major commando success of the war. It proved that small, highly trained forces could penetrate deep into enemy territory and cause serious damage. It showed the entire command structure that aggressive tactics and psychological warfare could defeat fortified positions. And it proved that Jack Churchill's medieval practices used in every battle weren't madness. It was quite impressive and functional tactics. By summer 1943, Churchill had been promoted to command of No. 2 Commando. His next mission would take him to the beaches of Sicily, the mountains of Italy, and the war's most daring prisoner capture operation. The Allied assault on Sicily began on July 9, 1943. 160,000 soldiers had set foot on the island's southern coast within the first 3 days. The objective was to take Italy out of the war and open a second front against Nazi Germany. Num 2 Commando, under the command of Major Jack Churchill, landed at Catania on Sicily's east coast. They had come ashore with full ammunition. Churchill's Scottish broadsword was at his waist, longbow and arrows on his back, bagpipes under his arm, ready. His men no longer questioned Churchill's equipment choices. They had seen what he could do at Vagsoi. They trusted him completely. The fighting in Sicily was ruthless. The Germans had reinforced the Italian garrison with elite paratrooper units and panzer divisions. They had turned every village into fortified castles. Every road had become an ambush area. By September, Sicily had fallen, and the Allies were preparing to invade the Italian mainland. Intelligence reports indicated that the Germans expected an attack farther north, near Naples or Rome. The defenses of the Salerno beaches would be lighter and weaker. Soon the intelligence reports proved wrong. Num 2 Commando landed at Salerno on September 9, 1943. They immediately encountered fierce resistance. The Germans had correctly anticipated the attack and reinforced the area with panzer divisions and artillery. Churchill's commandos were tasked with defending a strategically important road and railway junction in the town of Vietri sul Mare that dominated the western half of the Gulf of Salerno. If the Germans captured Vietri, they could rain artillery fire on the beaches held by the Allies. For 5 consecutive days, Churchill and his commandos managed to defend Vietri against relentless German attacks. They strengthened the defensive line on the tops of buildings, over trenches and piles of rubble. They repulsed infantry attacks and tank fire. They requested artillery fire from the Navy against German positions. Even when ammunition ran low and soldier casualties increased, they categorically refused to lose area control. On the night of September 14th, Churchill received new orders. German forces had occupied the hills above the town of Molina, taking control of a strategic pass descending to the Salerno bridgehead. An observation post on these hills had begun relentlessly shelling Allied positions. The observation post on the hill needed to be eliminated as quickly as possible. Churchill studied the terrain. Attacking the hills from the front would mean suicide. The Germans had machine guns equipped to cover every direction. German mortars on main routes had been destroyed. The observation post on the hill needed to be located and destroyed before any German forces could come to help. Churchill decided to try a different method, concluding that this plan would draw too much German attention to them. He would infiltrate German positions at night with just 1 corporal. 2 men alone, silently, could accomplish the mission that 200 men couldn't accomplish with great noise and chaos. This new method appealed to him greatly. Churchill and the corporal he took with him crossed beyond British lines after midnight. They advanced in darkness, using terrain features for cover. They tried to avoid German sentries by crawling over drainage ditches and along stone walls. The night had fallen into deep darkness, and visibility was 0. The Germans didn't expect an attack from 2 men armed only with sword and pistol. Just before dawn, they reached the first German position. Churchill noticed a cigarette glow in the darkness. German soldiers were on guard at a mortar position. They were quite relaxed, expecting no trouble. Churchill drew his broadsword and silently approached the position. Like a ghost from another century, he suddenly emerged from the darkness. The German soldiers were shocked at what hit them and immediately surrendered without any resistance. They had never experienced this officer with a medieval weapon and his calm demeanor before. Churchill used a pistol lanyard as rope to tie the first prisoner's hands and took him to the next position. When he arrived at the next position, he again approached silently, suddenly appeared, and demanded the soldiers surrender. Each time the Germans had to submit. Because they were shocked at the scene they encountered, they couldn't resist. By dawn, Churchill and the corporal had taken prisoner 42 German soldiers and an entire mortar platoon. They marched down the path to British lines with the captured German soldiers in front and themselves behind. Wounded German soldiers were placed in handcarts, captured from the positions and pushed by their imprisoned comrades. Churchill would later describe this scene as one from the Napoleonic Wars. Jack Churchill was awarded the Distinguished Service Order for his success at Molina. The citation praised his courage, initiative, and leadership. It didn't mention that he accomplished the entire prisoner capture operation with a single sword. The single sword detail wasn't a usual situation even for official military records. In spring 1944, the war dragged Churchill to Yugoslavia. He would support partisan fighters against German occupation forces. The mission was dangerous and the terrain was merciless. The Nazi units in Yugoslavia had received news that Jack Churchill was in Yugoslavia and were eagerly awaiting the day they would meet this medieval knight. Some officers argued that Churchill's reputation was for propaganda purposes, saying it wasn't a matter worth paying attention to, while others trusted intelligence reports and could grasp that the situation was serious. But none could predict what Churchill could do. In May 1944, Churchill received orders to capture Brack Island. Brack Island had a strategically important position as it controlled shipping routes along the Dalmatian coast. A German garrison of several hundred soldiers was in fortified positions, dominating the beaches. The soldiers under Churchill's command were a mixed force with different abilities. There were 43 commandos from No. 43 Commando, a platoon from No. 40 Commando, and approximately 1,500 Yugoslav partisans. Churchill gathered the soldiers assigned to his command. They held a meeting on the landing plan they would execute. After long discussions and talks, the landing day finally came. Churchill and his men landed on the night of May 2, 1944. They didn't encounter any German attack during the landing at Brack. The Germans had withdrawn from the beaches and taken defensive positions in the hills. According to the landing plan, first the Yugoslav partisans needed to immediately advance toward German positions. When the partisan commanders saw the strength of German fortifications, they had doubts about the plan and decided to wait until morning. Churchill went crazy when he received this news, because any delay in the attack that should be made toward the positions would give the Germans time to call for reinforcement forces, make additional preparations, and make a counter-move that would ruin the Allies' plan. But he couldn't force the partisans to attack. He had to wait with them for a long time throughout the night. The attack began at dawn the next morning. While No. 43 Commando conducted a flanking assault around the German positions, Churchill ordered No. 40 Commando to attack directly. The partisans remained in the landing area, providing no support. Churchill and his commandos were on their own. The Germans were waiting for them too. Machine gun fire from the hill positions began sweeping the beach. Mortar shells were falling among the advancing commandos. Churchill continued to advance anyway. He was playing his bagpipes while encouraging his men to run toward the hills with his sword in hand. A German mortar shell had hit near Churchill. The commandos were rushing to check on their commander's condition. Another German mortar shell had fallen near them. All soldiers except Churchill and those around him lost their lives as a result of the explosions. Without having a chance to grieve over this situation, Churchill and a handful of soldiers began charging toward the slopes again. During the charge, artillery shells, scattered from fire, opened from German positions, continued to fall in every direction. Wherever an explosion occurred, soldiers in that area were falling one by one like autumn leaves. As a result of the explosions, everyone except Churchill had either lost their lives or been wounded. Churchill survived because he was playing bagpipes to encourage the assault and had therefore stayed somewhat apart from the group. Churchill found himself alone on a slope in enemy territory. Some of his men's bodies were scattered across the area, while the wounded were crawling forward, hoping to find a more sheltered area. Most of the ammunition was depleted. Allied forces' soldiers were out of action. Most soldiers would have surrendered at this point. Churchill sat on a rock, took his bagpipes, and began playing the Scottish farewell song, "Will Ye No Come Back Again?" The German soldiers descending from their positions on the hill and approaching the slopes stopped in astonishment. They couldn't believe their eyes at the scene they saw. A commander whose men were dead and ammunition exhausted was sitting on a rock without thinking of escape. Calmly, as if sitting in his home garden, playing continuous songs with bagpipes in hand. A German soldier rubbed his eyes again. An old sergeant shook his head from side to side, turned to his comrades. "This man is a warrior," he said quietly, "a true warrior." A hand grenade exploding nearby knocked Churchill unconscious. When he opened his eyes again, he realized he had been captured. The Germans took Jack Churchill to Berlin for interrogation. The Germans believed that anyone carrying the Churchill surname must be related to the British Prime Minister. They sent him to the capital under heavy surveillance conditions. They hoped that Churchill would provide valuable intelligence information about Allied plans during interrogation. German intelligence officers in the Wehrmacht confirmed after long efforts that Jack Churchill had no connection to Prime Minister Winston Churchill. Moreover, this British soldier wasn't privy to any strategic information either. He was just an officer who loved swords and bagpipes. They were greatly disappointed. The Germans sent Churchill to Sachsenhausen concentration camp north of Berlin. Sachsenhausen was a special concentration camp created for prominent prisoners, politicians, resistance leaders, and those suspected of being relatives of important people. For most prisoners, Sachsenhausen was the last stop. For Jack Churchill, it was just an inconvenience. During his time in the camp, Churchill carefully observed the camp's layout, guard rotations, the route of fence lines, the positions of watchtowers. He identified weaknesses in the surroundings. He gathered allies among his fellow prisoners. A few weeks after arriving at Sachsenhausen, he began preparing an escape plan. In Sanderlager A, there was an exit adjacent to the fence surrounding the prisoners that led to a small garden. Churchill and his comrades, gathered for escape, began digging a tunnel from a drainage ditch in the garden in solidarity. They worked only at night, hiding the excavated soil under compost piles. The tunnel extended 110 meters, passing under the fence and emerging into a wooded area beyond the camp perimeter. On September 23, 1944, Churchill and 4 other British officers began crawling through the tunnel toward freedom. They emerged into the dark forest beyond Sachsenhausen and dispersed into the German countryside. Churchill met up with Wing Commander Bertram James, one of the survivors of this great escape. Their plan was to walk north about 200 kilometers to the Baltic coast and find a boat to set out for Sweden, which had declared neutrality in the war. For 2 weeks, Churchill and Colonel James moved on foot through Nazi Germany. They traveled at night, hid during the day. They stole vegetables from fields, drank water from streams. Two exhausted men who didn't speak the language avoided roads, towns, everywhere anyone might see them. The weather was getting cold. Their clothing was inadequate for the cold weather. They had no maps, compasses, or materials beyond what they could steal. They advanced to within a few kilometers of the Baltic coast before their luck ran out. Near the town of Rostock, a German patrol spotted them and asked for identification. Churchill and James had no identification. They were arrested on the spot, interrogated, and the interrogation determined they were prisoners who had escaped from Sachsenhausen. The Germans sent both back to captivity. But this time the place they were sent wasn't Sachsenhausen. Churchill was transferred to a camp in Austria, deep in the Alps, far from any Allied lines. By late 1944, the war had clearly begun turning against Nazi Germany. The Soviets were advancing from the east. United Allied forces were pushing the Nazis inland from the French coasts. But for a prisoner in an Austrian mountain camp, liberation seemed impossibly distant. Churchill spent the winter months of late 1944 and early 1945 as a prisoner. During this time of captivity, he watched the collapse of Nazi Germany. Allied bomber planes flew over the camp every day. He waited for the day he would be freed from captivity. Hearing news about the advance of Soviet forces, the fall of Berlin, Hitler's increasingly desperate orders. Toward the end of April 1945, Churchill and approximately 140 prominent prisoners were transferred from Austria to the Tyrol region of Italy. SS commanders planned to use them for hostage negotiations. After the prisoner transfer to Tyrol, a senior prisoner respected for his age within the prisoner group went to the Wehrmacht officers to express concern about being killed by SS soldiers. The officers listened to the complaint. A German army unit under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Wichert von Alvensleben was assigned to protect the prisoners. Wehrmacht soldiers serving in the German units in Tyrol outnumbered the SS guards. But a sudden tension arose between the two groups over a dispute no one could make sense of, and after this tension, the SS guards withdrew, thus leaving no Nazi soldiers in the shadow where the prisoners were located. The prisoners were left abandoned in this small Italian village, free in a sense but also stranded because they were in enemy territory. Most of the prisoners waited for Allied forces to come. Jack Churchill had no intention of waiting. Churchill had been a prisoner for about a year. He had escaped once, been recaptured, survived. He wouldn't sit in a deserted village doing nothing while there was still a war to fight. Churchill began walking south toward Allied lines. He covered 150 kilometers on foot along the Italian Alps, crossed mountain passes, advanced hiding from German soldiers. His ankle was injured. He had no food, no weapon, no identification. He kept walking anyway. 8 days later, he reached the town of Verona and encountered an American armored reconnaissance unit. The Americans didn't know what to do with this bedraggled British officer who had walked out of the mountains claiming to be a commando colonel. Churchill managed to convince them of his claims solely through his persuasive ability stemming from his character. The authority in his voice was very powerful, and the stories he claimed to have lived were tremendously astonishing. The Americans sent him back to England through military channels. Churchill managed to return home in May 1945 as the war in Europe was ending. Germany had surrendered. Prisoner concentration camps were being liberated one by one. Fighting in Europe was over. But World War II on the other side of the world wasn't over yet. Japan was still fighting in the Pacific. Thousands of British soldiers were still losing their lives in Burma, Malaya, the Southeast Asian islands. Reading news of this conflict in the Far East in the newspapers, Churchill immediately requested to be sent as a soldier to the Far East. He wanted to fight shoulder to shoulder with the Japanese. He wanted to carry his sword into one more war, play his bagpipes on one more beach, prove that old tactics used in wars of the distant past were still valid in the modern age. The War Office approved the request. In summer 1945, Jack Churchill had boarded a ship going east to Burma, to Japan. At the start of his journey, he didn't know that after the dropping of 2 atomic bombs, the fate of the war and the world would change. While Churchill was sailing towards the Far East by ship, he received news around India that the atomic bomb had dropped on Hiroshima. The date was August 6, 1945. An American B-29 bomber had dropped a bomb on the city of Hiroshima that killed 80,000 people instantly. 3 days later, a second bomb would destroy Nagasaki. After the second atomic bomb dropped, on August 15th, Japan announced its surrender. World War II was officially over. Churchill received this news with bitter disappointment. He had spent months preparing for the invasion of Japan. He had studied Japanese tactics, Japanese fortifications, the Japanese warrior spirit. He had planned to lead commandos assigned to him toward Japanese beaches with his sword and bagpipes, as he had done in Norway, Sicily, and Yugoslavia. His sadness and disappointment at these plans falling through was so great that he wouldn't be able to participate in one more battle, even for the last time. He wouldn't have the chance to test himself against the enemy one more time. His reaction to this negative situation also became legend, along with the heroes who served in the war with him. According to Jack Churchill, if it weren't for the American atomic bombs, the war could have lasted 10 more years, and he could have continued his heroics by rushing from one front to another. This is how he was rumored to have lamented to himself. Whether this rumor is true or false, it was a dark joke, but it also gave a clue about Churchill's character. Churchill was a man who thrived in war, who found meaning in the chaos of war, who felt most alive even when face to face with death. The concept of peace was like a cold, indecisive, timid foreign country to him. The British Army didn't know what to do with Jack Churchill after the war ended. Too aggressive for peacetime garrison duty, too eccentric for staff positions, too famous to ignore. His service record was extraordinary. He had fought in France, Norway, Sicily, Italy, and Yugoslavia. He had managed to escape from a concentration camp. He had taken prisoner 42 Nazi soldiers with a single sword. The War Office gave him administrative duties in Burma, would help oversee the transition from war to peace. Churchill found this work boring. He had no patience for paperwork, no interest in bureaucracy, no talent for the diplomatic compromises that peacetime required. He applied for transfers to active military units. He volunteered for dangerous missions. He sought every opportunity to return to soldiering, the only profession that could fill the void inside him. By 1946, the British Empire was collapsing. India had demanded its independence. Palestine was drifting into chaos. Colonial territories in Africa and Asia were mixed with nationalist movements. The world Churchill had fought to defend was becoming unrecognizable. In 1947, Churchill was sent to Palestine as second-in-command of the 1st Battalion Highland Light Infantry. The situation in Palestine was dire and chaotic. Jewish refugees fleeing the Holocaust were flocking to the region, demanding a homeland. The Arabs in Palestine characterized this situation as an occupation and resisted this occupation. British soldiers were caught helplessly between both communities, trying to maintain order while being attacked by both sides. Churchill's time in Palestine didn't last long. He left shortly before Britain's withdrawal from Palestine in May 1948. His military career had ended at this point. He was 41 years old. He had fought in the greatest war humanity had witnessed. He had won medals that most soldiers could only dream of, but he had no idea what to do with the rest of his life. Hoping to eliminate all these uncertainties, the British Army offered him training assignments, staff positions, administrative roles he could be interested in. Churchill accepted them without enthusiasm. He qualified as a paratrooper in his 40s, jumping from planes just to feel the rush of adrenaline again. But peacetime military experience could never compare to any experience lived in the intensity of war. Churchill needed something else. A new challenge could help him feel alive again. This crazy man who fought with swords and longbows, who stormed beaches with the screams of bagpipes, who escaped from Nazi concentration camps, was about to discover a new passion. And this passion would occur in the least likely place. He was about to become one of the first surfers in British history. On July 21, 1955, a 48-year-old British officer stood on the banks of the River Severn in Gloucestershire, England. Holding his handmade surfboard, he was watching the movements of a tidal current that flowed up the river from the Bristol Channel twice a day. Local fishermen witnessing the situation thought he was crazy. For generations they had seen waves on the Severn, but no one had tried to ride those waves. Churchill stepped toward the brown water and began waiting. The bore appeared on the horizon as a white line, moving upward against the current. It wasn't a big wave compared to ocean waves, but still a wave about 1.5 meters was approaching him, and Churchill was determined to move on that wave. He caught the bore and rowed it more than 1 kilometer up the river, becoming one of the first people to surf a river wave in Britain. It was exactly the kind of absurd, unnecessary, slightly dangerous activity that defined his life. He didn't settle for watching the wave pass. He had to be on it. He had to feel the wave under his feet. He had to use this wave masterfully, just as he masterfully used the longbow, broadsword, and bagpipes. Churchill retired from the British Army with the rank of colonel in 1959. He had served the army for more than 30 years. He had fought in a world war and several minor conflicts, won medals from multiple nations, survived experiences that would kill most people 10 times over. He was 52 years old and had finally learned to make peace with civilian life. His retirement was as eccentric as his military career. He developed a passion for radio-controlled boats, building detailed models of warships and floating them in the pond near his home. He repaired old steamboats and used them along the River Thames between Richmond and Oxford. He continued to play bagpipes at memorial ceremonies and regimental gatherings. His daily train journey became legend among other passengers. Churchill would take the train home from London every evening. When the train passed through his neighborhood, he would open the train window and throw his briefcase toward the tracks. Surprised passengers thought this old man had lost his mind. Actually, Churchill had calculated the exact point where his home's garden was adjacent to the railway line. The briefcase would fall to that calculated point every time, saving him the trouble of carrying it from the station to his home. When asked about his wartime adventures, Churchill was modest. He didn't boast about the Germans he killed or the prisoners he captured. He didn't exaggerate his role in operations or expect praise in his name for victories belonging to others. He only told the truth, because the truth itself was so extraordinary and terrible that it needed no embellishment. Jack Churchill passed away peacefully on March 8, 1996, at age 89, at his home in Surrey with his family. He lived a longer life than many of the commandos he fought alongside, his fellow prisoners at Sachsenhausen concentration camp, and many heroic soldiers who served in World War II. The obituary given to newspapers struggled to summarize his life. He was a man who killed enemies with a longbow in the age of tanks. He was a soldier who captured enemies with a sword in the age of machine guns. He was a madman who played bagpipes while mortar shells exploded around him. He was a freedom hero who escaped from a Nazi concentration camp and walked 150 kilometers for liberation. He was a free spirit who surfed river waves, threw briefcases from trains, and refused to accept that the modern world had no place for medieval warriors. Jack Churchill wasn't the most decorated soldier of World War II. He wasn't the most successful commander or the most brilliant tactician. Perhaps with the strategies he made, he didn't play a decisive role in any battle or change the course of history. But what Churchill did was simpler and perhaps more important. He proved that individual courage still mattered. He proved that unconventional thinking could defeat superior firepower. He proved that a man with sufficient determination could accomplish what armies couldn't. Today, few people remember Jack Churchill, but his spirit still lives. Churchill taught us this. History remembers not only the winners, but also those who live without fear of death. Sometimes those who chart their own course instead of following the rules. Perhaps today we don't need a sword, bagpipes, but we need what Churchill had. We need the unwavering belief that one person can make a difference despite all the machines, armies, the system. Churchill, when drawing his arrow in the morning at Lepinette among the mists, wasn't just targeting a German sergeant. He was targeting the future, saying to it, "Even in the modern world, old spirits can live. Courage hasn't died. It's just continuing its path in different forms." And when the arrow flew, it found its target. Just like Churchill himself. Since we've come to the end of the video, please remember to press the like button and subscribe to our channel. By activating your notifications and activating the bell button, we want you to be the first to hear about our new videos. As we always say, you are ambassadors of peace to reach our community to the whole world. You are part of keeping alive the memories lived in World War II. We offer you our endless gratitude. Stay well.